Okay. Good evening, everybody. Testing a new. Just testing having a fan here. So if you can't hear me, let us know. I turned it off for now. Okay. Let's begin. Just give me a second. Sorry, running a little late over here. Okay. Let's begin with, first of all, thank you for joining us. It's been a few weeks. We've been a little bit busy. Thank God. Okay. Here we go. This week's Torah portion is Parshas Matos. It's actually double portion. It's Matos and Maseh. We're going to focus on Matos for now. So, the Torah portion starts off as follows. And Moses spoke to the heads of the tribes, Lamor, saying, Zeh hadavar, this is the thing, Asher tziva Hashem, that God has commanded. As follows. What did God command? Ish ki yidar neder l'Hashem, when a person makes a vow to God, or makes an oath to prohibit themselves from something, they shall not violate the word, whatever came out of their mouth they shall do. Okay? And Rashi explains, what is a vow? If a person says, it shall be prohibited to me, just like a sacrifice, that I will not eat, or I will not do a certain thing. One might think that even if a person swears to eat flesh of a carcass, we apply to them whatever come out of your mouth they shall do. Scripture therefore states to prohibit what is permitted, but not to permit what is prohibited. Okay, so the power of speech has a limit. So the fact that if you say, I'm taking an oath to eat something that's prohibited by the Torah, that is not allowed. You're not allowed to do that. You're not obligated to do that. So only something, the Torah says, only something that is permitted I can prohibit upon myself. And then he continues, they shall not violate their word. This is similar to the Hebrew, they shall not profane their word, meaning they shall not treat their word as unholy. Okay. Which means you got to take your speech very seriously. And Maimonides explains, when a person takes vows in order to improve their character traits and correct their conduct, such vows are considered both commendable and praiseworthy. For example, Maimonides continues, this is, by the way, in Mishnah Torah, Laws of Vows. If a person struggles with gluttony, and they take a vow to abstain from meat for a year or two, a person who is overly attracted to wine and makes a vow to refrain from drinking it for an extended period of time, or to never become intoxicated. Someone who is consumed by the pursuit of wealth, or constantly seeks personal gain, and makes a vow not to accept gifts or benefit from the people of a particular region. A person who is excessively proud of their appearance and takes a Nazirite vow. Okay. So all these are legitimate, Maimonides continues, all these are legitimate paths in the service of God. Concerning such vows and others like them, our sages say in the Mishnah, vows are a safeguard for restraint. Even though such practices are a form of divine service, a person should not make a habit of taking vows or self-denial, or become accustomed to them. Instead, they should simply refrain from things that are appropriate to avoid without making a vow. Okay, so Maimonides at the end says that it's not, don't actually take the vow, because vows have serious consequences, but Maimonides says the practice of denying yourself from things are self-restraint, are very, very important. And a person develops this quality, you'll become like a skill, you'll become very good at self-restraint. And as the Torah tells us, that you shall make yourself holy with what is permitted with you, right? The Torah says, Kedoshim to you, or our sages tell us that you should make yourselves holy even with things that are permitted. Now, here's the problem, right? Maimonides says, and he quotes the Mishnah, that it's a very important thing to take vows and to use self-restraint. But let's see some other sources that might say the opposite. All right, so we have the next source as follows: the Jerusalem Talmud, Nedarim, page 9.1. After Rabbi Dimi says, in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak, are the Torah prohibitions not enough that you seek to prohibit other things? So Rav Dimi, in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak, makes a very, very, practical argument, which is, the Torah already prohibits many, many things. We have a hard enough time keeping those things as a nation. It's not so simple. Unfortunately, not everybody keeps all the prohibitions in the Torah. And now you're going to say, we're going to take on more things? Sounds unreasonable almost. And let's see Maimonides in Mishnah Torah and Hilchos Deos. Before we just quoted the laws of Nadar, the laws of vows. Here we're saying the Hilchos Deos, which are more about how to live life. And he says as follows: a person might reason, since envy, desire, and pursuit of honor and similar traits are harmful and can lead a person astray, I will distance myself from them completely by adopting the opposite extreme. Such a person might decide not to eat meat, drink wine, marry, live in a comfortable home, or wear fine clothing. They may choose to wear sackcloth and coarse wool like priests of idol worship do. This is also an improper path and is forbidden to follow it. Anyone who adopts this approach is called a sinner, as it implied in the Torah's description of the Nazarite, for whom atonement is required. The sages explain, if a Nazarite who abstains only from wine requires atonement, how much more so someone who deprives themselves of many permissible things. So here what Maimonides is referencing is that the Nazarite, which again is a Torah tells us that someone is allowed to become a Nazarite, and what they do is they essentially a vow, and in the vow they say that I'm not going to drink wine or cut my hair for a certain period of time, at a minimum of 30 days, and not come in contact with a dead person. And when the person, this Nazarite, finishes this time, he has to bring a few karbanos, a few offerings in the temple, and one of them is a sin offering. What's the sin? He did exactly what the Torah told him to do. The sin is because, like we just explained, he needs atonement for the fact that he abstained from wine, and he abstained from God's creation, and therefore he is required to bring a sin offering. So therefore, continues Maimonides, our sages instructed that a person should refrain only from what the Torah itself has forbidden, and should not prohibit additional permissible things through vows or oaths. As they said, it is not enough for you what the Torah has already forbidden, and you seek to forbid additional things for yourself. The same principle applies to those who fast excessively. This is not considered the proper path, for our sages discouraged a person from afflicting themselves through constant fasting. Regarding all such forms of excessive self-denial, King Solomon warned, do not be overly righteous and do not be excessively wise. Why should you destroy yourself? So here we have actually Maimonides previously in the beginning of Mishnah Torah, in the beginning of his Code of Jewish Law, he actually says the opposite, quoting the Jerusalem Talmud that we said before, right? Don't be excessive. Is it not enough what the Torah already forbade for you? And we have another Jerusalem Talmud quote in Kiddushin, page 412, and he says as follows, or I guess it's chapter 4, halacha 12. Rabbi Chizkiah said, in the name of Rav, a person will eventually be called to account for all that they saw with their eyes and did not eat. Rabbi Elazar took this to heart and would save up small coins so he could eat of every new thing once a year. Right? So here we see that the Talmud is actually saying, God created wonderful things, beautiful things. Why shouldn't we partake of them? Obviously, these are things that are permitted by the Torah. So, which one is which one is what's the right version? We have two competing things, both from the Talmud and from Maimonides, who is again he is bringing it together in a code. Is it that we should totally engage with the world, refrain from the world? What's going on over here? So here we're going to say that there's actually we're talking about two different people. If a person is constantly trying to find a way to immerse in the world, that's a different thing. In other words, they're not trying to find a way to serve God. They're trying to enjoy the physical thing, enjoy physical pleasures. That will lower a person spiritually. That will not allow a person to be a good Jew. But if a person is using it for properly, then actually you could elevate those things. And versus a person who it's going to draw them down, then they have to be disciplined. So really, we're talking about two different people. Depends who's asking the question, right? We're not answering the question; we're answering the person. And if the person is somebody who's going to be drawn into something negative, then the answer is avoid it, as Maimonides says in the laws of vows. But if we're discussing a regular person who could possibly benefit from the gifts that God has given us, then that person should engage in the world. Let's see a few more examples that we can find of this dichotomy. So here's a teaching from the previous Rebbe that was taught in the book called Hayom Yom. It's a Hasidic calendar for the day of 25 Adar 2. He says as follows: The Chassid Rabbi Mordechai Haradaka related, the first teaching we heard from the Alter Rebbe when we arrived in Liazna, that was the city where the Alter Rebbe lived in the beginning of his leadership. What is forbidden, and what is permitted is unnecessary. For some 3 or 4 years, we grappled with this until we integrated into this various aspects of our lives. Only then did we have a private audience with the Rebbe, meaning the Alter Rebbe, to ask for a path in our divine service. So here we see the Alter Rebbe, the first teaching they heard, what is forbidden, and what is permitted is unnecessary. And that took them 3 or 4 years to get that into them. And we could actually find a source for this in the Talmud. The Talmud tells us that a person who is a Amaret, someone who is unlearned, should not eat meat. We discussed this once in a previous class, but we'll go through this idea again. And what we learn here is that a person who is ignorant, does not study Torah, should not eat meat. Why? Seemingly, that seems like to be a facetious statement, because obviously it's not true. A person is allowed to. There's no law anywhere. It's just a statement in the Talmud, but there's no law that you have to check in the kosher butcher. They don't check, how much Talmud and how much Torah did you study today before you could get a piece of meat. But what they do. What they do is what it does teach us. It's obviously, if a person who is even unlearned, if they're going to study, if they're going to eat a piece of meat, they have to make a blessing, and has to be kosher, etc. But what is this teaching us? So in Chassidus it explains that a person is on the level of a human being. That's the highest level, and it's our job to use lower things like mineral life, plant life, and even animal life, and to uplift those things onto the level of the human being. So what does that mean? It means that if a person is going to eat meat, it's important that they are able to actually elevate the animal. Otherwise, how do you better than the animal? You have to put yourself on that higher level, and then you can actually refine the mineral life, plant life, and even animal life. So it takes conscientious eating, and only a person who is a Torah scholar, according to the Talmud, or someone who's engaged in Torah study, is able to do that. We'll tell you another story. The previous Rebbe once told a story that his father, the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, was eating, and a piece of food slipped off his fork. Happens. And he made a joke that the food is not ready to be eaten yet. So what does that mean? It means that if a person is, somebody who's a whole person is eating food, it's not just that they are uplifting, that they're just eating for energy, but they're eating because they're actually uplifting the food and using that energy for Torah and mitzvahs and serving God. But if a person is eating the food just to enjoy the food, he could actually get dragged down. So here's a famous story. It's a good story. There was once a person who was eating the Shabbos cholent, the Shabbos meat, with much gusto, and the Baal Shem Tov asked that all his students put their arms around each other, and because of that, he was able to take them to see this scene in a spiritual way. And what they saw an ox dressed in Shabbos clothing, wearing a shtreimel on his head, and eating. And they were very shocked by that. And he said, really, he was actually a person who, this was a person, he was not a bad person, he was a righteous person, but he became so involved in the food that you are what you eat. And this person became an ox because he was busy eating meat. However, since he had done it for the sake of heaven, he was doing it in honor of Shabbos, so he still was wearing the shtreimel. But he became an ox. So we see how important it is that we don't get dragged down, but rather elevate. And we could also understand, based on this, we could also understand why there were many times in Jewish history where rabbis made decrees, and they made safeguards. That's what we said before, right? That vows are safeguards. So what are? Let's give some examples of some safeguards that were given by the rabbis. For example, it's actually going to happen this year. Is we don't blow the shofar or read the Megillah. It falls down on Shabbos, like it's going to be this year. The first day of Rosh Hashanah is going to be on Shabbos, and we are not going to blow the shofar on Shabbos. We're going to blow the shofar only on Sunday. Why? Because we're afraid that a person is not going to necessarily be learned in the laws of blowing the shofar, and he's going to say, I don't know how to blow the shofar. I need to hear the shofar. So he's going to go to his local rabbi and carry the shofar on Shabbos, which is forbidden. You're not allowed to carry from a private domain to a public domain. So you're going to go and you're going to violate the Shabbos. The same thing applies to a Megillah. So when was this decree enacted? Decree was enacted during the Second Temple. The Second Temple era was not a complete redemption, and therefore not everybody was on the same level, and therefore the rabbis enacted many decrees because that was where the Jewish people were holding. Versus in the First Temple era, this wasn't necessary. The Jewish people were on a much higher level, and the idea that someone would violate the Shabbos in order to do a mitzvah was unheard of. So we see that in different generations require different approaches, and the same thing applies. The same thing applies in different people. So sometimes a person, just like in the First Temple era, where godliness was apparent, there was no need for this. Some people, godliness is apparent in them; they don't need to take safeguards. Versus in some people, just like in the Second Temple era, they have spiritual darkness, and they can get dragged down by things. So we have to put safeguards and guardrails in order to make sure that we don't fall off the rails. We'll give another example. In our generation, the Rebbe spoke about the Hasidic custom of saying Lechaim. Now that's something that was widely practiced in Russia and Poland, in Eastern Europe, where people would pour a little alcohol and say Lechaim. And in America, in 1963, the Rebbe tampered this practice by saying that until the age of 40, no one should drink more than four. First, it was actually 3, and then 4 little cups of alcohol. Right? So basically saying there's a limit. Right? It used to be there was no limits, and people had to make their own judgments. But the Rebbe said, no, our generation is different, and therefore we need to use restraint. And it's no longer we could just sit and drink alcohol, especially younger people. The Rebbe used till the age of 40, and then after 40, he said that it's a personal request that people still don't overdrink. So we see that different generations require different things. It was not negative. It was not considered. It was not negative in Russia in those previous generation, but in our generation, it is negative, and we all see how people sometimes can abuse alcohol. The Rebbe also found the other way, where the Rebbe found that radio and television in the Jewish world was considered really negative because it brought negative things right into your home. At the same time, the Rebbe used radio and television for his own talks, for Torah teaching to be televised and on the airwaves. So here we see kind of the opposite approach, where in the previous generation this was negative, and the Rebbe said, no, we shouldn't bring it to our homes. That's not, the Rebbe didn't, it told his followers they shouldn't bring it to their homes, but the fact that these things were created shows there must be something really, really deep there, something really, really, that God created these things, right? These aren't created by man, these are God-given technologies. So the fact that God gave us this technology, we have to find a way to use them for good. Okay. We'll do one more example of this. In a talk, the Rebbe once spoke about a child who's 12 years old. And the laws of vows actually apply to a child who's already 12. Even though, generally speaking, for boys, bar mitzvah age, at age 13, that is when they become obligated mitzvahs, but vows start at age 12. Interesting. So the Rebbe learned a lesson from this, that in order to engage with service of God, which starts at age 13, but applies to every single one of us, we have to learn, we have to actually exercise our restraint. And that starts before. So in other words, if we want to get used to doing things that are appropriate according to Torah, saying no to things, saying yes to other things, we have to already start with things that are not necessarily forbidden, and kind of use the testing lab is on things that are permitted. And the Rebbe spoke to young children that even boys who were 12 years old, the fact that you're turning 12, this shows us this is the time for you to learn how to avoid things, even though they might not be technically forbidden. So here we see there's approach. The whole idea of this subject of vows shows an approach that we have to look at the person, and we have to look at the specific generations. And God willing, when we do that, we'll be able to serve God. Wishing everybody great Shabbos, and we will see you, God willing, next week.